living a simple life, something out those aches and pains from working on the farm.
Hey guys, it is Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms here in the mountains of North Carolina. Part 3. It's time for part 3 of our emergency communications series. This will be the final part. Unless you have any requests for a part 4, this ought to wrap it up. So in part 1, I explained to you my own personal catastrophe that I lived through. There actually was a second one, but that one was a doozy. And how CB radio pretty much saved the day for not just me and my family, but my community. It actually helped out neighbors. It actually helped out a lot of people during that crisis. And without it, I am positive, I'm not just guessing, but I am positive that things would have been a lot worse for a lot of people. So that was part 1. In part 2, I talked about the various forms of communication. A lot of them are still here on the table. Local communication, mid-range communication, ham radio as long-range communication, and then the ability to receive communications from all around the world and how you can go about finding those. And then we get to part 3, which is this part, and that is, how do we power all this stuff? Obviously, in my case, back in part 1, I had a CB radio that was installed in an automobile, and therefore it had its own generator, the engine, an alternator, and it's powering my equipment. It had the radio installed in it with the antenna installed in it, so it was kind of this total package. And I do believe, in general, that that is the best solution to the problem as far as CB radio and GMRS and even mobile ham installations like 2-meter stuff. That you have a vehicle and it powers everything up. Here's the problem though, gasoline, right? And I kind of alluded to this in part 1, but I didn't really get into it all the way. My car, I hadn't filled it up because I didn't think about the fact that there was an emergency. I wasn't paying attention. So I had a half a tank, but this was a V6 old automobile, carbureted, and of course it got about 12 miles to the gallon. And between just sitting in the driveway charging that battery while I was communicating, or traveling back and forth to get water and supplies as the days went on, that fuel level got really, really low. I had 1 extra gallon that I used to power my lawnmower, so I poured that in the car at some point. But by the time the tank was nearly empty, I was starting to sweat it out. And thankfully, we just stopped traveling. I had to rely on other neighbors to go refill my water until the power came back on. How do we avoid that portion? And of course, you could go the route of a generator. A lot of nicer homes out there have whole house generators, but I don't know if you're ever familiar with them. I've installed them for a few customers over the years. These things are fuel monsters. Okay, you get a propane powered one. If you're have a propane setup like myself, you're going to suck that tank dry in an amazingly short amount of time. Running your air conditioning, running power for your house is certainly nice. And if you have a regular storm where you lose a tree or drop a power line and you're out of power for 24 hours, super great thing. But if you're talking about a week or 2 weeks, you're going to run out of propane. And I'm talking, if you have a 500-gallon tank, a lot of these things will literally suck a 500-gallon tank dry in that amount of time. It's almost comical, and that's because they're 12,000 watts, 15,000 watts, 20,000 watts. I mean, they're monstrous, right? So generator is certainly one way, although I don't personally recommend it. Of course, you can get a portable generator. Honda makes some inverter generators, so does Ryobi, so does Harbor Freight. There's a lot of inverters, small generators that will run, and it will, but you're still talking about a consumable material. When you talk about fuel runs out, and if we're talking about a catastrophe that is large or not a good one, not something that we ever want to really experience, the ability to refuel may never come or may take months to come. And I don't even really want to talk about why that might be. I'm sure those of you watching this video are probably already attuned to things that can happen in this world, and we all hope it don't, but they could. So generators, I have a generator, and I use it to keep things like the refrigerated food and stuff going in the event of a localized catastrophe, something like a bad storm where I know I'm only going to be out of power for a day or two and things will go back to normal. But what about if things aren't going to go back to normal in a day or two? Again, using a generator will, most people don't store enough fuel for maybe more than a week of any type. So things to consider. Beyond that, and this is where I want to get into what I've recently been doing but have already been into for years, I've just finally upgraded, is this. And here's a picture of my setup. And of course, I don't want y'all to get the wrong opinion here. This is not anywhere near what you need, but this is something you could maybe look at as in a future possibility. That is a 1.2 kilowatt solar setup. And so every hour that it's operational in the sunlight, it produces 1.2 kilowatts of energy. And this energy is renewable energy, which means that I'm not constantly pouring fuel into it. As long as the sun comes out, I have a relatively large lithium-ion battery pack and a charge inverter and controller and all this other stuff. I now have the ability to power my refrigerators off of that. So I no longer need to use my gas generator unless we go days without sunlight. So that's a good feeling, but it's not really the scope of what I want to get into. What I want to get into is what it would take for y'all to power this kind of equipment in an emergency situation. And there are totally ways to do it. I'm going to pull some things out here that I have. And again, if you wanted to, you could just get a deep cell battery or a car battery like these here. Now, car battery is not going to sustain charging and discharging over and over again anywhere near as well as a deep cell battery. So if you have a trolling motor on your boat, chances are you have a deep cell battery. If you have an RV, well, chances are you have a deep cell battery. If you do not, you might want to invest in that if you're going to take this very seriously. If you're not going to take it very seriously, I have made a good living off of taking scrap batteries that from cars that were headed to the junkyard, and they might be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old, but still hold a decent charge. And I'll take those batteries, set the ones that still test 50% charge aside, and I use them up until recently when I moved to that bigger system to run my emergency solar setup. And so you have that option. If you don't want to spend that kind of money or can't come across a used battery like that, you can also get something like this. This is a lead acid battery as well. It is a deep cycle battery, but it is called a sealed battery. It doesn't vent out, and so you don't have to refill it. It's kind of maintenance free. This, let me see if I can read how many amp hours this is. 2.1 amps is the initial current. So it's not a terribly strong battery, but if you bought 4 or 5 of these, or if you bought one double the size of this and bought 2 of them, you'd still be in golden shape. But honestly, what I'm going to show you tonight is you could run every bit of it off of this for well over an hour. I would say this is probably, for most applications short of ham radio use, this is going to be 2 to 3 hours. And so that's not bad, right? But what do we do about charging that? And that's where I want to get into. Again, you could go start your car, but that's going to burn fuel. You could run a generator and a battery charger. That's going to burn fuel. And you could put in a massive solar setup like I put in over there, but that's going to be great expense. What ways can you do this on a budget? And that's where stuff like this comes in. This was free for me, and you could go down to your Volkswagen dealership to this day, especially if you happen to have bought a Volkswagen from that dealership, and get these for free usually. This is a Volkswagen. It is called a trickle charger. It's a small wattage, small amperage charger. 3.2 watts is what this is rated at max. And we'll go outside here in a little bit, and I'll show you just how many watts and how many amps and how many volts these things are putting out. But here is something, even if you bought this online, I think these go for about $10. So maybe you buy 2 or 3 of these, and you hook these up, and you could recharge a battery. This one's hooked up to an outlet, right? But a 12-volt cigarette lighter type outlet. But you could take that, just cut the wires off, and you could feed that directly into this battery right here. And again, I'll show you how this works outside, and charge this battery. So there's an opportunity for you to create free power of your own without also tipping off anybody that you're doing so. Think about a generator makes a lot of noise. Turning all the lights on in your house makes you kind of noticed. So perhaps in the situation that you're thinking of, you don't want to be noticed. So you want to make quiet power, and solar is definitely a great way to do that. Wind is another alternative, although you have to be in a location where wind power would be effective. There are 400-watt wind generators. The only thing I see wrong with a wind generator as opposed to solar is the possibility of damage in a weather event or a tornado or something like that. Where a solar system like this, you can stash away and whip out when the sun comes back out. Wind generators generally are installed, and then they stay installed. Let me show you this, because this one I feel like, this is actually what I have been using all these years. I don't think this company's in business anymore. I tried to find some information on it before making this video. Keep it simple, solar system. Right, and so this one's called the Mercury 2, and it looks like it was Helena, Montana, which is really cool that it's a U.S. company. But this little binder, this little thing here with a cord hanging out of it, check it out. That's a 20-watt solar panel that you could just whip out anywhere you want to, just lay it in the sun, put it up against a rock or whatnot, and begin charging And it actually came with this, which is, and I'll show you this outside, but Simply Supply, and that is actually an inverter, or not an inverter, but that's actually like a solar charge controller, because we don't want to end up putting 40 volts into a 12-volt battery, but it's okay to put 18 volts or 17 volts into one for a amount of time. So it came with this, and this plugs into the solar. This thing controls the charge, and then that plugs into our battery to charge our battery. You can also, in a real emergency, power a device directly off of something like this, because again, it's not going to allow such an excessive amount of voltage that it would cause damage to an electrical device. And this one here, I believe it's 20 watts. These are polycrystalline. I don't know how old it is. I've had it for getting close to 20 years now, maybe 18 years. And it works. I literally powered my radio equipment off of this on days that the sun went out. And well, I've actually got it back in the box here because I've moved up, but these things unscrew. And so I actually had this permanently mounted on the roof outside. So it was just always charging some batteries. And what I had 4 of these. These are the same batteries that my gate opener takes, which is also operating off of solar. So I had 4 of these, and I could run this stuff for a couple hours, and it was safe. So that's it. What I want to do right now. Well, wait a minute. Before we go outside, let me talk about 2 more things. I will show you that. No, I'll tell you what. Let's go outside and take care of that right now. I'll go out here. We'll plug these things in. We'll put them out in the sun. I'll get my voltmeter, and I want to show you voltage and amperage to give you an idea of what these things are going to do, and talk to you about how long it will take to charge a battery back up. All right, here we are outside. I've got both these little systems set out in the sun. Now they're not angled, but it is well, it's right past 12:30, so the sun is pretty much as high in the sky as it's going to get here. You might be able to squeeze an extra 1/10 of a watt or whatever out of each of these panels, or maybe 1 extra watt out of the bigger one if you had it positioned perfectly. But it is a very clear sunny day. It is the summertime, so this is about the max these things are going to put out. And you can see I've already hooked up the multimeter here to this one, and it's putting out 21, just 22 volts pretty much, which seems like it'd be too high to charge a 12-volt battery, but when any kind of load is on this at all, it's going to drop right down into the right range. So plugging that into a battery is going to be perfect. It's going to be fine. It would take a considerable amount of time, because what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch this over to amperage, and I'll show you just how few amps. Yeah, 1/15 of an amp. That's not a lot of amperage for sure, but it would get the job done. If you were to take a deep cell and put it on charge all day with this thing, they call this a trickle charger because it's not meant to bring a battery back from the dead, but it certainly is a great maintainer. If you left the battery hooked to this at all times, it would probably be able to maintain it and maybe give you a very small charging rate. So depending on the size of the battery, if you went with a smaller battery than an automotive battery or a full-size deep cell, something like this here, well, then this should be fine to charge it. All right, let's hook it up to this one here, which I think is a 20 watt. I'm not positive. It might be a 15. I'm not sure, but we're going to check it out right now and find out. All right, now I've got the other one set up. We're on volts. This one's producing a constant 15, and the reason is it appears that this smart supply here, which is model SS5-30, must be some kind of a very small, very light wattage, light amperage charge controller. It's saying input 10 to 30 volts at 30 watts max, and it outputs 5 to 30 volts at 25 watt max. So my guess is it's a charge controller, which is really neat. So this was a trade. I have no idea. I'm guessing this is 20 watts worth of panels. That is going to be my best guess. So it is putting out 15 volts. Now the other one was putting out a lot more, but let's change this over to amperage and see what we get. And there's our big difference. So we have a 3 amp charge, a little over 3 amp, we'll call it, maybe maxes out at 3.1 amps. That's considerable. That would definitely charge a full-size automotive battery. It would take a while, but in an 8-hour day, if you got 8 hours of sun, you could certainly bring one back. So very interesting how little solar power is required to charge up a system. Here it is at 3.12. And again, if I put this thing at the proper angle, or if I lived in an area that was closer to the equator, these numbers would be higher, 3.15. So you're looking, you know, a charger that you buy for an automotive setup usually comes in 2 amp, 10 amp, and 50 amp configurations. 50 amp being for a fast charge, 10 amp would be something where you could charge a battery in maybe 2 hours, but a 3 amp, if you charge a battery for 6 or 7 hours on 3 amp, you're giving it a good, slow, steady charge. That's really what batteries like to see anyway. So look at it slowly climbing up, 3.2, so maybe there's a little bit of cloud cover up there and it's fading away. Yeah, 3.2 amps. But again, now I could charge an automotive battery with this. The idea here, if we're going to be doing these off-grid emergency setups, is to have enough solar to recharge whatever it is you decide to go with. Now, if you want to use a full ham radio rig, you're looking at needing something more than this, because at 100 watts output or higher, you need more power. But for a CB or a FRS type system, or even recharging walkie-talkies, that kind of stuff, recharging batteries to use for other stuff, this would work just fine. And you're not looking at a very big investment. Like I said, I got that for free, and I got the other one for free. So these, well, that one was a trade, so I guess I paid something for it, although I can't even remember what it is I traded for. I'm sure it was something I wasn't really interested in keeping anymore, so not much of a trade, right? Anyway, let's go back in and we'll continue the conversation. So there it is. So you get an idea with a system like that, what you can do, how much you can charge. Let's say you want, and I'm going to tell you this right now, this stuff becomes kind of an addiction. You are constantly going to be wanting to figure out ways to create more power. Well, we've talked about ways to power this and this, the 12 volt setups, but now how do we convert that to power something like this, which is 120 volts? Or how do I power a device that runs on 120 volts to, say, charge batteries? Rechargeable batteries on a lot of our equipment require a 110 plug. AA batteries that would run like, a little handheld walkie-talkie, those are rechargeable. You might have to have that plugged into a 110. So you would take the batteries that you have got, car batteries, deep cell, whatever you end up with, and you'll need something like this. This is an inverter that I picked up at a yard sale. This one's 400 watts. It does have 800 watt peak. This will actually run quite a bit of stuff. In fact, I could run a computer off of this if I wanted to, a television set, a DVD player. In fact, I have run all of those things off of it. I ran the big TV that we have, which is like 32 inches, I think, and a DVD player, and had some lights on in the house, all off of this. And I ran it for about 2 hours on the deep cell that was charged by that 20 watt setup. You can get these brand new for about $35 to $45. You can find them used. A lot of guys and gals that go camping will pick these up, and they quickly move up to larger ones. If you want to run a refrigerator or something like that, you need something over 1,000. That will not run off of the stuff that I'm talking about. 1,000 watts is just more of a system. So let's say, though, and this is where I'm going to end this conversation here after this, let's say you want something that's going to be able to run, maybe you want to make a battery bank. Maybe you want to be able to run stuff for an extended period of time. In most of the situations I've talked to about, an hour of communication should give you everything you need, maybe once in the morning and once in the afternoon to get updates. And so you're talking about 2 hour runtime. The solar stuff I've showed you, especially that 20 watt one, would definitely be capable of recharging a battery over the course of a day that's only had 2 hours of use out of it. So that's perfect. But if we're looking at more stuff, if you want to run the lights in your command bunker or whatever it is you've got, your ham shack or your radio shack or whatever it is, I mean, maybe it's just in your bedroom, maybe it's in the family room. But if you want to run lights, if you want to run a small fan, stuff like that, well, you're probably going to need a little more power than what I've shown you. And there are inexpensive ways to do that. Now, I'm not talking about building a system like I put out there, because that thing was anything but inexpensive. But there are ways to do it on a budget. And this is the first thing you're going to need. Well, the second thing you're going to need, but you are going to need this. This is a solar charge controller, and you can spend hundreds of dollars on these. This one was exactly $7 with free shipping. And it even has, if you look on the front there, USB charging ports. So you can recharge your phone directly off of this box. And on the bottom here, you can see the screw terminals that allows you to hook in a solar panel and your battery and your 12 volt out. So things like this that are run directly off a 12 volt running straight from this. So this very inexpensive thing is actually going in my EMP proof container, and I'll get into that in another video talking about what EMPs are and why I feel it necessary to prepare against something like that. But that right there, you could get one of those for about $8. Again, you're still going to need a deep cell battery. If you're going to go with something where you're using a larger amount of power, I would definitely recommend a full-size deep cell battery. So that is going to set you back, $75 to $150 depending on the brand, but it will pay for itself. I mean, it's something you're going to have, and they usually last 7 to 10 years. If you want to go really crazy, you could pick up maybe a 60 amp hour lithium battery. That's going to be about $300, and that'll last you pretty much a lifetime. But I don't want to scare you off with a number that high. The last thing you're going to need is, instead of getting something like this where maybe it's only 10 or 20 watts or 30 watts, you're going to want to buy a bigger panel, and they're really not that expensive. The 100-watt panel that I purchased, and 12 of, to build that array, those were $72 a piece with free shipping. So for 100 watts, that was $72. Let's go with this and tax. Let's say we're in it for 100. We add a battery, a big deep cell battery, we pay another 100. We're in the whole mess for $200. You pick up an inverter for another $50. Now you're in it for $250, and you have now created a way to communicate and stay aware in any kind of major disaster. And that's pretty darn cool, isn't it? I feel like it is, and that's why I set that stuff up years ago, not only in the old house, but in this house. And now it's the reason why I've taken that first step in going completely to renewable self-created power here at the farm. I hope you have enjoyed this series. It's something a little different than what I normally do. I love to talk about radios, but I don't really know that I've ever spent a whole lot of time talking about the things that worry me, the things that I'm interested in outside of, homesteading. And so if you've enjoyed this series, please think about liking and subscribing. And I'll see you next time. Take care.
There's always something that needs a little fixing on FireFox Or